Hey guys, I'm dropping this video before I have to go to back to school tomorrow. I just want to talk about the Warriors situation um, in a more extensive, with a little bit more depth here. Um, I had to talk about the fact that Chris Paul is not officially retiring, but is being pushed over to San Antonio in his 19th year of his career, which is, I don't know, is an easy way to say it. It's definitely not getting the prime time spot that it was getting, of course, last year or in this past. Now, this in many ways is a good thing. Last year, we saw the introduction of Chris Paul to Golden State. That really changed the dynamic of the Golden State Warriors, but not for the better, but for the worse. Um, Chris Paul has been struggling anyway with a lot of personal issues and just adding a new point guard, a ball dominant point guard to put life in, potentially put life in back into the franchise in a time when it just he just needed to have his own team, like, and he kind of had that with the Suns, but they traded him when they went to the finals when they potentially could run it back. I felt like he was losing his self identity here, and that was a major problem. Why going forward, it was becoming more and more of pain to see that Chris Paul is continuing on, which is the reason why I made a video talking about how the Golden State Warriors, specifically the Steph Curry era, needs to end. Um, Another sad thing is that saying that Chris Paul is going to San Antonio is now a bad thing. A couple years ago, if it was back in like 2013, 2014, him going to the Spurs or the Lakers would be a good thing, because um, the Spurs should be a place where they can balance out Chris Paul. Tony Parker can go to the six-man role, and he can potentially fit in Greg Popovich's system. As for the Lakers, um, you got Chris Paul, Kobe Bryant, Dwight Howard, and Steve Nash. And Chris Paul could have took the pressure off Steve Nash in his later years, but um, these are two places that I thought Chris Paul back then would and should have and would have flourished in San Antonio and LA, but instead he chose to go to Los Angeles and just bounce back a few teams, and now he's in the Spurs, and now it's a retirement home for CP3. Chris Paul was a great is probably one of the best point guards in NBA history. Um, I will say it with I will say about him, just like I said with the Golden State Warriors. Um, Chris Paul is synonymous with the NBA in a way. You can't say the name Chris Paul and not think about the New Orleans Hornets or even the Los Angeles Clippers, or vice versa. At least by the late 2000s, early 2010s, so on and so forth. So forth. There were also, of course, many players that contributed to the success of Chris Paul because it was so popular. Because we had Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan with the Los Angeles Clippers. We had James Harden, which, if we're being honest, it would could be the downfall of why Chris Paul can't win a ring, because it was you had a ball dominant point guard with a shooting guard, but or was back then. He couldn't be as dominant as he was back then. I think that it's unfortunate that it's ending, because it doesn't need he doesn't need to end his story like this. It never needed to be Chris Paul being the starting point guard for a team for 14, 15 years straight. That did not need to be the case. There could have been a lot of alternative methods to continuing on Chris Paul's longevity. Well, at least he already has longevity. There could have been many other options to Chris Paul, um, not only continuing his longevity, but maintaining his role and potentially becoming a champion like Nate Archibald, like Bob Cousy. Um, and according to multiple videos on the internet, and even according to my video on the Warriors, this thing could apply with Chris Paul here. Just how the news said of players that can take the load off of Chris Paul. Just keep going with new different players and different identities that can back up Chris Paul. So we have brand new players, and we can have more longevity, more hardwood dominance with Chris Paul. But NBA or the Los Angeles Clippers specifically, when he was with the Clippers for all these years, didn't want to do that. They just, I don't know what they wanted to do. Whether they wanted to keep Chris Paul, Blake Griffin. I don't know why. I guess they were getting too much pressure from the media to keep the tandem of Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan around. But I mean, they missed a boat that could have easily saved Chris Paul in the long term. Right now, it's not obviously going well for them, and for CP3, and I hope the best for CP3, and I hope this gives them the ability to turn around, but I don't think that will. And as someone who was a kid, growing up with the player and loving the player for what he is, and I was there when to watch his 20 point 20-6 game on a very efficient percentage with no turnovers. I was there when he made it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals when he floated in that game-winning shot over Tim Duncan and the Spurs. Um, I was I was there to watch the early ball dominance he had in New Orleans. I was there in a lot of situations that Chris Paul grew with, and to see him now in this stage is just disappointing. So, you know, at the end of the day, right? It's not a bad thing when a player retires. That sort of is in a state of Vince Carter like form where it's not as good as its heyday, and it's definitely never going back to its heyday. Um, and I think Father Time is something that they just can't escape from unless there's going to be new leadership that's going to propel him to a title when he's like a role player, just like Al Horford, and it's going to be push good push towards the brand itself. So Chris Paul needs to just retire and start working on his son to build him up towards a basketball career and work on something new and innovative, right? And I will acknowledge the fact that he went from basketball to commercials like this, like being the spokesperson for State Farm, which is an insane jump. We saw, in particular, with basketball, we saw him go from New Orleans to Los Angeles to Houston, made multiple conference finals appearance, and then he was in the NBA finals with the Phoenix Suns. So, and that's pretty good. So I'm impressed, and I think that he needs to move on, work on other things. I think he needs to put basketball on the back burner now because we have seen him at his best. I think this Chris Paul is a point guard. He was a great player, but he's gonna retire eventually. He's gonna end his career eventually. It should have ended anyway, but like I said many times before, with um, players retiring like Vince Carter, Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, and LeBron James in the future, and many other players that will eventually succeed him in retiring. And even though they were not in the best shape, well, maybe LeBron is the only exception here, but they weren't in the best shape. It's still pretty disappointing to see that they're ending and see that they're retiring. So, guys, what do you think of this? I don't know. A lot of you guys actually think that CP3 should have retired earlier, and you guys probably don't care at this point. But comment below, tell me your thoughts. Thanks for watching. Your main man Ryan, and as always, stay tuned for more.